Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be talking about how to pay off your debt. So what we're going to be talking about today is the different methods for paying off your debt. We're going to be talking about the king of debt, Dave Ramsey. We're going to be talking about what I'm doing with my debt and some other debt related topics, such as we're going to be talking about should you pay off your house early. We're going to be talking about the risks associated with different styles of paying off your debt. We're going to be talking about should you get a 15 or a 30-year mortgage. We're going to be talking about what a good interest rate is and what you should compare it to. We're going to be talking about how much you should put down on your house and why. I hope you guys get a lot of value out of this today if you guys have any debt out there. And what I want to do is give you guys a debt playbook so that rather than being prescribed a plan, because this is a video, I can't talk to you directly to your situation. I would rather you guys have the tools to go make your own decisions. I don't want to prescribe you a plan because I don't know you or your financial situation. I just want to give you a debt playbook so that you can look at your own situation, think about it, synthesize the information in your own situation, and make your own decision. So don't go off of what I'm doing or what somebody told you to do. Your situation is going to require a different solution. Anyways, let's get into this. The first method of paying off debt is the debt snowball. Basically, this is a method where you take your debts and you list them from largest to smallest and you pay off the smallest one first. The benefits of this is that it frees up your income earlier. So if you pay off that smaller debt, you can basically throw that money at the other debts. And the downside of this is that it doesn't necessarily take into account interest rates, which leads us into the next method of paying off your debt, which is the debt avalanche. In the debt avalanche, what you do is you list your debts from largest interest rate to smallest interest rate, and you pay off the largest interest rate first. Mathematically speaking, this is the quickest way to get rid of all of your debts, but it can lead you into some situations that maybe don't make sense for your situation. Now, a lot of you finance nerds out there are like, no, debt avalanche every single time, be disciplined, blah, blah, blah. And you Ramsey heads are out there like, no, debt snowball every single time. But there's really some factors to consider when you want to make your decision. When you're going to make your decision, what you need to think about is, what are your liquidity needs? In other words, if you paid off one of your debts, would your life become manageable? Let me give you an example. Let's say that you make $1,000 a month and your debt payments and servicing all your bills is $1,100. But there's enough savings that you have to pay off a debt that would reduce your cost of living down below that $1,000, let's say by $110. It makes sense to pay off that debt so that you can afford your life and stop going further into debt. There's a lot of situations where it doesn't necessarily make sense to do the other method. So really you just have to take into account your own life situation when you're trying to make your decisions. What are your liquidity needs? Maybe you have kids, maybe you are down on your luck for some other reason. I didn't mean that kids is down on your luck. Kids are great, I'm sure. But anyways, maybe you just need to do something different. So let's get back into the next one. The king of debt, Mr. Dave Ramsey. So I don't have much problem with Dave. He has a lot of people with a train wreck of a life that call into his show. And that's interesting. I really like that show. It's really fun to watch. But one thing that I do differ on Dave is that I wouldn't necessarily pay off the smallest debt first every time. In my situation, what I did was pay off the credit card debt first, not even necessarily because of the interest rate. Here's my rationale on that. It's my liquidity needs. I think about safety in a different way than Dave does. Dave says save $1,000 and then after you save $1,000 start paying off all of your debts. But let's say you have $100,000 in debts, right? And your smallest one is not your credit card debt. Let's say your smallest debt is a student loan of $20,000 and your credit card debt is $80,000 for whatever reason. Here's my thing. If you're paying off that credit card debt, which I would pay it off because it has a huge interest rate anyways, if you're paying off that credit card debt and you lose your job, you can't go further into student debt to compensate for that loss of income. But you can always go back into credit card debt. That's why I would recommend paying your credit card debt first. That's just my reasoning for it. You can always go back into credit card debt. You can't always go back into student debt unless you're gonna go back to school to make up for the lack of a job, but I don't think anybody's gonna really do that. And speaking of Dave Ramsey, let's talk about another debt-related topic, and that is paying your house off early. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say that I haven't thought about paying my house off early or that it's stupid to pay your house off early. Of course, I mean, paying your house off early, the way that I look at it, it's just a very low return on your money. So, in theory, let's say that you had a $100,000 house, which I do not because I live in Seattle and that is rough. But Anyways, let's say you had the $100,000 house and you paid the whole thing off when you bought it versus someone who put zero down and they put the $100,000 in an index fund. If you put those things side by side, even with that person paying in with the 3% or so that they're losing on that house payment, if that index fund goes up by an average of 8 to 10% every year, they're going to end up with more wealth on the other side of that mortgage than the person who paid their house down early. So it doesn't necessarily make sense from a mathematical standpoint to pay off your house early. Another thing that I have with paying your house down early is you are not giving yourself very much liquidity. If you're throwing all your money into your house, let's say that you lose your job and you have all that liquid money in stocks, well, now you can take some of that stock money and shuffle it over into a mortgage payment for a while you find another job. If you were putting all of that money into your house, you have to do something like take out a home equity line of credit, and I just don't like the idea of that as much. Which brings us into our next topic, which is my philosophy on debt. And the way that I think about debt is you will be able to get rid of your debt when you have more cash than you have debt, right? So for me, what I do, just because of my life situation, single guy, no kids, nothing, just me, I could literally go end up on the streets and it would be fine. Like, my life is very mobile, so that's my situation. Other people's situation, it might be a little different. The way I see it, if I really did want to pay off my house, the best way to do that is move myself as quickly as possible from here to having enough money to pay off that house. And the quickest way to do that is in, say, stocks and other types of investments, rather than putting the money actually physically into the house in the form of equity. A lot of you guys that follow me on Instagram saw that I sold all my stocks, and that was because this is what I think about debt. Every month I sit myself down and I say, okay, this is how much excess money you have for the month. What do you want to do with it? This month I sat down and I was like, okay, I've got a couple $1,000s. I was looking at the stock market, I'm looking at the valuations, and I was just like, I really don't want to buy any of these, so why would I want to own any of these? So what do? I took all my money, I put it on my car loan. My car loan was an 8.6% interest rate, and that's just a story for another time. But anyways, I just figured I don't really see like an 8.6% upside or dividend yield or any of that in the market. So I don't really want to buy these stocks at these prices. So I just went ahead, sold off, paid that car off, and now I own my car. So that was nice. That's how I'm paying off my debts, is I just, look, this is your capital. What do you want to do with it? So I don't necessarily follow one or the other, but I kind of prefer the avalanche and just taking a step back and saying, look, where's your capital best suited right now? And in the future, that could be paying my house down. I don't know. We'll see. All right, so let's talk a little bit about interest rates. So no one ever sat me down and talked to me about interest rates or what they mean. So as we talked about earlier, your interest rate will basically determine how much you are paying on a loan that you have every year. From a mathematical standpoint, it makes sense to attack the highest interest rates first and then the lowest interest rates later. So that's kind of generally what I am doing, attacking that car loan. My student loans are all around 4 or under 4, so I'm not too worried about them. It's about 13 grand, and I'll probably get those paid off, trying to get them paid off before about March or so. But anyways, the interest rate is something that you should look at, because on the other side of your interest rate on your loan, there's an investor. So your choice between investing and paying off debt should be how much upside or how much of a dividend do you see in that investment. For example, should you buy a 6% dividend stock, or should you pay down a 3% debt? Well, in my mind, depending on your time horizon, your situation, what I would do is I would rather buy that stock that's yielding 6%. From a mathematical standpoint, even if that stock were to go completely flat, you will make more money buying that stock than paying down that 3% debt. When you account for risk though, of course, like, you have to make that decision. The stock could go down, you know, and then you wouldn't want to sell it off at that point. You might want to buy more of it. Meanwhile, that debt is a guaranteed 3%. So you just kind of have to make that decision. So when you think about debt, you have to decide, is my money better paying off that debt, or is it better investing somewhere else? You know, you have to think about it as an investor. 30 versus 15-year mortgage. So this is going to be a little bit butchered of a version of how long this video should be, but let me just give you a quick synopsis. Basically, a 15-year mortgage is usually going to give you a lower interest rate, and a 30-year mortgage is usually going to give you a higher interest rate, because debt interest rates go based on how much risk the lender is taking on. So if the lender is lending you money for longer, the interest rate's going to be a little higher. A lot of people will say, like, yeah, you should get a 15-year mortgage like Dave Ramsey, because then you're paying less interest. But there's a couple things that could be potentially wrong with that. One is with a 15-year mortgage, you're sinking more money into the house. In addition, if you do want to turn that into a rental, without getting too far into the math, it's better to have a 30-year fixed rate mortgage because less of your capital is tied up in that house, and the tenant is going to be the one that's going to be paying that interest anyways if you've done the deal right. So I'm not an advocate of the 15-year mortgage in all cases. It's not always bad. I mean, if you're a little bit more risk averse and you're just like, look, I just want to pay off my house. Or like I could think of another example. For example, if you just have a huge income and you just plan to pay off the house in like 5 to 7 years or whatever, you have to think about it yourself. But from a mathematical standpoint, a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, because of the future value of those dollars, it makes more sense to get a longer mortgage. Last thing, with a 30-year mortgage, yes, you are paying more in interest, but by the time you go to pay that interest, the money is actually worth less just due to inflation. And last topic of discussion, how much money should you put down on your mortgage? So it depends on how much safety you want to have and how much you want your cost of living to be. Some people like to put as much as 50% down. Other people like to put a lot less down. And just the math behind it when it comes to the interest rates and just how much you're putting down, ideally, if you wanted to eventually rent the place that you're living in, your best rate of return is going to be if you have as little money as possible in this place tied up in this real estate. In theory, if you could have zero money in your property and rent it out profitably, that would be the best return on your money. But you just kind of have to play with it based on your situation, how much risk you want to take on. So basically, just to make it very simple and visual, you could consider it a few different sliders. As your down payment goes up, your risk goes down, your cash flow would go up if it was a rental, and your return on the money that you actually plopped into the house would go down. So in theory, you want to have zero in the house, but of course, theory doesn't always work for everybody's situation. So you might want to do 20, you might want to do 50, you might want to buy 60. It just depends on your situation. So hopefully you guys like this playbook. I don't want to make your decision for you, but those are kind of the factors that should go into your decision making, and that's how I'm making my decision. That's why I sold all my stocks. If you guys like this video, make sure you guys give this a like. It really does help the channel grow, and we should be at 1,000 soon. I don't know if we're at 1,000 in this video, but I really appreciate all the engagement, and I'll see you guys in the next one.